Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. My name is Chris.
And my name is James.
And we're the Formula One Bros.
Just two twins with a love of F1 to share our thoughts on everything in the world of Formula One.
And we are here on Monday after a very exciting Singapore Grand Prix.
Yeah, which I was kind of surprised at because Singapore has it's produced some good races in the past. Mm-hmm. But it's not quite on the level of Monaco where it always produces a boring race. Mm-hmm. But, it's no Brazil or Monza.
Or Germany 2019.
Germany 2019.
Still, I think, one of my favorite races of all time.
Yeah. So, but it was very entertaining. Let me ask you this. So they got rid of that whole section in the last sector. What did you think about it?
I think that's a huge track improvement. I agree. I think on a street circuit, overtaking is always going to be tough. Following is going to be tough, and there is a little bit more of a decrease in raceability in this year's cars compared to last year. Last year the rate of downforce loss following a car was around 20%, and now it's back up to around 35%. Still not as bad as 2021 levels, which was north of 50%, but still significant. So it was still a little bit of a procession, and also street circuits like this one, like this and Monaco are traditionally, you get through lap one, the everybody kind of gets strung out a little bit, and then you're just in pace management mode, and you're doing that just to make it a one stop, and it becomes this processional. And that's essentially what we had for the first. We had a little bit of shakeup at the safety car and a little bit of action after the restart, but it wasn't until the VSC where things really started to get interesting.
That's where the race started to get a little
which
spicy.
We'll get into that. But so there was an element of that, particularly in the first 20 laps before Yuki Tsunoda brought out the safety car.
Yeah.
No, sorry, it was Yuki Tsunoda brought out the safety car.
His tire.
And before that, there was elements of that, but there was also some great overtaking and great battles. Yeah. I think that portion of track that having those that right left right kind of bus stop situation disrupt the flow a lot, and it allowed drivers to pull out to coming around to the DRS zone on the front stretch, pull out to 7/8 tenths of a second. And by that point, the DRS is not effective. Yeah. But because you just had that one chicane at the end of that long straight, people were able to stay a lot closer, and it made, I think, though there wasn't a DRS, there wasn't DRS on that straight because you had that massive left-hand kink. Yeah. It made that DRS range on the front stretch a lot more important.
Yes. Yeah. So I would totally agree. I think that was a huge track improvement. Normally, I think back to some of the track improvements that we've seen on certain, I think back to the first update to Spain before they got rid of the Sector 3, before they changed to the Sector. It was kind of pointless. And some other ones Abu Dhabi was okay. The track updates were okay. But this, I think, it was a significant improvement on the racing. It was really cool. And it tripped me out. I'm not going to lie. The first time I saw it, an onboard of that, and I just, in my mind saw it, and, also, was expecting, how, to play it on the video game. I was oh, you got to turn right here. And they just, kept going. I was what is happening? Yeah,
so essentially, for those that don't know, when you're coming out of the last DRS zone, the last straight over the bridge, you take that hard right-hander, and there's that runoff. And then you're going around to the left, and you sort of have to brake to the left into this right-left chicane. Yeah. You're having to brake while turning, and then turn right and then left. When you kind of turn around to the left before hitting that right-hander, they just kept going straight on.
Yeah, it tripped me up.
And it definitely tripped me up the first couple times, but I think it wasn't a solution to the problem of street circuits.
No,
by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that it made the DRS zones that were there much more impactful, and it kept the racing a lot closer. And just in general, like, I think the drivers were pretty positive on it too.
Yeah, I would agree.
So I'm a big fan of that. I'm super glad that they did that. That I think now that track as it exists in this iteration is a really good street circuit.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
I even though we have that processional, there are things that you can just count on in Singapore.
Yeah.
Safety car.
Oh, yeah.
And rain at some point to throw chaos into the mix, which is what happened in qualifying.
Yes, yeah, that was a very good that was a good qualifying too.
Yeah. So I just think all in all, it was a great weekend, but it really was, for me anyway, it seemed like a race in two halves.
Yes. Yeah, it really was. The beginning was pretty predictable. Not a whole lot happened. I actually found myself I was watching the race, and I found myself within the first 10 laps, I found myself scrolling through TikTok. And I was like, oh my God, I need to pay attention to this race. But nothing really had changed. But you're right, when the VSC came out, the second half of the race, and really it was the 15 laps were exhilarating.
Yeah. Well, and we'll get into that in a sec, but the first thing that really happened was the safety car brought out by Yuki Tsunoda.
Oh, yeah. Dude, did you see the picture of the side of his car?
No, I didn't even see what happened.
So
really.
I think his tire, basically shredded, but it it made the whole side of his car look like a cheese grater.
Wow.
It was all mangled, the whole, and at first I was why is he retiring? He just got a tire puncture. And then I saw the pictures of the car, and I was I was shook.
Wow.
It was a lot of damage.
Yeah, so the safety car, and honestly, the safety car didn't really change that much. I think the biggest thing that it did was it affected Charles Leclerc. I think Ferrari actually executed a really great strategy. They had the split strategy to because they had Lando Norris and George Russell to contend with. They opted for a split strategy, which was a really good move. I really do. They're starting to string a couple races together here and there that I think, maybe the results are not there, but Zandvoort was a really good race for them.
Yeah.
Monza was an incredible race for them.
Monza was a very good race.
This, another really great race. So I think Ferrari has started to kind of turn a corner a little bit.
Really, since the end of the summer break. Really, since this second half of the season after the summer break, so far the races they've done a pretty good job.
Yeah, and so they did a really good. It was just really, I think Charles just got really unlucky. I think he was trying to. The team was trying to get him to build a gap because they knew if a safety car came out, they were going to double stack. They likely were going to double stack anyway. But it's just unfortunate that he allowed that gap to get too big. So when the safety car came out and they had to stick to a delta, it allowed him to get jumped by both Mercedes and Lando Norris because they just had to hold him so he didn't crash. So I don't blame Ferrari for that one. That's just really, really unfortunate luck that happened. But the people that really affected were Red Bull because they started on the hard tires and it came out around lap 20, and so you're not at that point of the race in a 62 lap race. You're not going to ditch the hard tires for a set of mediums. That's essentially committing yourself to a two stop race. Yeah. Which nobody was committing to doing at that point unless there were some sniffs of rain in the air, but it never ended up happening. But it really affected them, and they got up to fourth. I think it was 4th and 6th or something. Yeah. They got up to a really good place, and they just sank through the field. So those were really the only three people. And then after the safety car, it was kind of business as usual until the VSC came out.
Yeah, which. Remind me, why did the VSC come out?
Esteban Ocon.
Oh, that's right.
And parked in turn 3.
That's right.
In the runoff.
Yeah.
And that slowed everybody down enough, and it was Sainz, Norris, Russell, Hamilton, Leclerc. Russell and Hamilton pitted.
Yeah.
For fresh mediums, so they opted for the two-stop strategy. They took advantage of that, and the other three, the two Ferraris and Lando Norris, stayed out. Had the safety car come out, I think all five of them would have pitted. Because the VSC came out, I think Ferrari did the right thing, and Lando did the right thing too, and opted for track position, field position over fresh tires.
Yeah.
And when they got going again, those Mercedes were fast. They were
like 3 seconds a lap faster.
Yeah. At one point, yeah, they were quick. On average, they were about 1.8 seconds faster per lap, and they were closing at a rapid rate, and that
which was ridiculous.
Was just I don't know about you, but I was glued to the timing tracker on the left-hand side.
Yeah, it was screen. It was crazy to watch.
Time.
Like, I remember seeing, after the VSC, I remember seeing the gap. And I just thought to myself, I was like, they're in Mercedes. Not good this year. They're not going to catch up. They're not going to catch up.
And then they did.
And then I like took a couple laps later, I looked at the timing chart. I was like, oh my God. And then they were like right behind Charles. And I was like,
yeah, that didn't happen at all.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. Speaking of the last 15 laps, we can't talk about that without talking about how smart and how well managed the end of that race was by Carlos Sainz.
Oh my God.
That he was playing chess while everybody else was playing checkers. That was insane.
So why I know it was smart, but it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was keeping Lando Norris within DRS range. And first off, it was insanely like ice cold, ice running through his veins when Ferrari was like, hey, Norris is 0.8 behind you. And he was like, I'm doing it on purpose. But it was to keep Lando in DRS range, so that way Lewis could stay behind Lando?
Yeah, so essentially by giving Norris DRS and keeping him in his DRS, Lando could use that DRS to defend against both Mercedes. And it was George Russell before he crashed.
Yeah.
And so because if you open up that gap, say Lando doesn't have DRS, Carlos doesn't have DRS, the Mercedes will... It's much easier for the Mercedes to fly by. Them with DRS on fresher tires, doing 1.8 seconds a lap faster. Then they get by Lando Norris, and there is nothing keeping them from getting past Carlos Sainz.
Yeah.
So the path to victory there was keeping Lando in DRS so that Lando could defend. And when he started doing that, I was like, that's what I do in the F1 video game, because like I can and I know how the AIs work. Like that was some video game stuff right there, and it was so cool to see. And like
that was pretty wild.
And it stops the Mercedes dead in their tracks.
Oh,
like
yeah.
They could have and arguably should have won that race,
which is crazy to think about in this season, but
yes,
they absolutely should have won that race.
That was incredible. Yes. Other than that, we can't talk about this Singapore Grand Prix without talking about Red Bull.
Oh, yeah. So throughout the season, like teams like Ferrari and McLaren have been good through the corner. Not necessarily good on a straight line, but good through the corners. And Red Bull is better in their car is better in a straight line than through the corners. So I kind of figured that like Ferrari would have. I thought before practices or anything going into the race, I thought, okay, it's going to be Red Bull, but maybe Ferrari and McLaren and Mercedes will be able to like challenge a little bit. But I was like, there's no way Red Bull's not going to win this race, and there's no way Max is not going to win this race. But I was not expecting them to be absolutely nowhere. They looked like a midfield car.
Yeah.
This week, which is insane.
Yeah. I don't really take FP1 timing seriously at all because we don't know fuel loads. We can kind of know what sort of run plans that each team on, so you can kind of extrapolate, something. But FP2 is one where I really start to get an idea of the pecking order, because that's when they do qualifying runs.
Yeah.
And then FP3, they're really getting dialed in for the race. They're making their final preparations for qualifying, and then they're getting dialed in for the race. But so once we got to FP3, I was like, okay, yeah, something's up with Red Bull. Not really sure what it is. But there was this part of me that I was like, they're going to show up to qualifying and they're just going to ruin everybody's hopes and dreams. Yeah. Like they have done this entire season. That's what I thought it was going to be. And I was shocked. I picked a really, really bad day to go judge a marching band competition. I completely missed qualifying. Yeah. And in a judge's break, I just looked at the qualifying results and I was like, this is a joke. I thought I didn't think it was real.
I know.
And then I went back and watched it, and I was like,
2006?
Well, rain, that kind of explains it. But yeah, there's just something about this track these Red Bull cars did not enjoy.
Which is funny because before like 2020, well, really before 2022, it was the opposite for Red Bull. Mm-hmm. They weren't really good in a straight line. But in the twisty tracks, like where you needed the more like the cornering speed, they were dominant. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is why...
And now it's flip-flop.
Which is why in 2018, in a season that was dominated by Ferrari and Mercedes, one of the only Red Bull wins of the season was Daniel Ricciardo at Monaco.
Yeah.
That's, and so... And that's always been the case. And I just think that this ground effect has changed that a little bit. And they're able to use a lot of straight line speed. But, yeah... I was shocked, but honestly, I'm not getting my hopes up too much because Suzuka is a track that they do really well at,
and especially Max.
Especially really Max, and I just think they're going to be right back to their winning ways in a week's time.
I have a feeling Max in Japan. Do you ever see like after there's like an American football game and like one team is upset? And like you'll see someone like playing that same video game on like rookie mode. Like I saw one meme like Texas beat Alabama, and this one guy was like went on to play NCAA 2014 as Alabama and Texas, but like put it on like easy mode and like scored a touchdown. It was like 114-7. I feel like that's what Max is going to be doing in Japan.
Taking out their aggression. I don't know. I think we're getting to the point of the season where Max is about to wrap up the championship. I would not be surprised if it fell his way in Suzuka and he took home the championship in Suzuka.
Shades of Sebastian Vettel, 2011.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that happened. Same thing happened last year. I wouldn't be surprised. And so I think they're going to be a little bit more focused on that. Yeah. And I think, and Max Verstappen, the thing that I really like about his mentality is it's just on to the next one. He puts it out of his mind and he refocuses super quickly. He doesn't get rattled very easily at all. Yeah. And I think that's what makes him such a successful Formula One driver. And that is what makes him one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah. But with Red Bull not performing well at Singapore, you know what singular driver still has only managed to do 100% podium for an entire season? The singular driver.
It's not Schumacher, is it?
It is Michael Schumacher. Still the only driver to have gone a season with 100% on the podium.
What was that, 2004, I would imagine? Or 2002?
I want to say it was 2002.
Yeah, because 2004, they had a retirement or something or finished fourth in one race. I can't really remember.
Yes, I saw it on Twitter. But yeah, this was a very good race. What ended up happening with George on the last lap? Did his tire get really worn out?
No, what I think it was a little bit of monkey see, monkey do. So he was following Lando Norris, and Lando clipped the barrier very, very slightly going into the left-hander. I guess it was
2002.
It was 2002. He clipped the barrier on the outside of a turn. I can't remember what turn it was. I want to say it was turn 14. Anyway, he clipped the barrier on the outside, and Lando did, and he got away with it. It was just a little bit of brush, but George was following him, and George clipped that same barrier and broke his suspension and went straight on into the tire barrier afterwards. Yeah,
I didn't see what had happened. I just saw the clip of them coming around the corner, coming up the straightaway, and I see Carlos, Lando, Lewis, and I just see George going across the screen. And I was like, what?
Yeah, so he just clipped the outside barrier, did essentially the same thing that Lando did. Lando got away with it. George didn't, ended up in the barrier, and that was that. Next thing that I want to talk about has a little bit to do with the race, but also has a little bit to do with the upcoming silly season, which has up until now been pretty boring. But the other thing that we need to think about, and my vote for driver of the day, is Liam Lawson.
100%.
Liam Lawson, I voted for him for driver of the day.
Dude.
I understand why Carlos got it, because he's the first person to not be a Red Bull driver to win the entire frickin' season. But Liam Lawson, the only driver in F1 history to score his first points at Singapore with an amazing drive up to 9th place. And the crazy thing is, and he made it into Q3, he took Max Verstappen out of Q3, beat Max Verstappen in Q3. The crazy thing is, he lost 2 positions on the start, and so after the race, he was mad at himself. That, I think, that the whole performance says a lot.
That is a dog mentality.
Yes, I think that is, 1, really great performance from him, but 2, that mentality tells me everything that I need to know in the kind of F1 driver he's going to be. And I think that he deserves a full-time drive next year.
Oh, yeah, I 100% agree. Now, where would he go? Because I do you think they're going to keep Daniel Ricciardo in that? I think they were going to keep Daniel Ricciardo in that seat. So do you think they would replace Yuki Tsunoda?
Here are a couple avenues that I see for him, either 24 or 25 getting a drive. The first path I see is, and I think the most likely and easiest path for him to an F1 seat, is Williams ditches Logan Sargent, and Red Bull puts him on loan, like they did with Alex Albon the first year at Williams, puts him on loan at Williams, and he goes to Williams.
Congrats, Williams. You have 2 Red Bull drivers.
Yeah. So that's the easiest path. I'm not convinced that Williams is 100% thrilled with that.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because they're 7th in constructors right now. They've put all of their eggs in the 2024 basket. James Vowles has even said that they are sacrificing this year in order to get to 2024, which is crazy because they're 7th in constructors.
I know.
They're doing super well. But Alex Albon has scored every single point for Williams. And so they need somebody who has... If they really are going to try and work their way back up, they need to not be a team that takes on loans from other teams because they have talent that they don't know what to do with. They cannot be a dumping ground for unwanted drivers anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that they need to change. It's worked out with Alex Albon, but it hasn't worked out with Nicholas Latifi, and so far it hasn't worked out with Logan Sargent. Because originally... Logan Sargent wasn't even in the top 3 of who was supposed to get that, and it just ended up being Logan Sargent because they needed to fill a seat. Love Logan Sargent, but he has not done enough. Liam Lawson has done what Logan Sargent should be doing in 3 weekends in F1.
Yeah.
And he's done stuff with 3 weekends in F1, that 2.5, we don't really count Sandbort, that Logan Sargent hasn't been able to do all season. So that is, I think, the easiest path. I don't think Williams are going to be as thrilled about it, but I think that is the easiest path forward.
So what do you see being the spicy path?
The other paths are he just teams up with Yuki Tsunoda for next year. And Daniel Ricciardo is no longer a part of the F1 grid. I think that was a lot less likely before Liam Lawson's performance in Singapore.
Yeah.
I think Liam Lawson's performance in Singapore has now put a lot of pressure on Daniel Ricciardo. That he's set a new standard for that team and for that seat specifically. Mm-hmm. And I think Daniel Ricciardo is going to need to come back from his injury, and he's going to need to drive the wheels off of that thing. He's going to need to score points. I don't even know if he's going to be racing in Suzuka. And that's another thing, is the more time you're giving Liam Lawson in that seat, the more of a case. And you're dealing with somebody like Helmut Marko, who has been very prone to make really last-minute rash decisions.
Yeah.
Take a look at Nick DeVries. That was a rash decision that didn't pay off based off of one performance at Monza.
Yeah.
So I think that is another path. And the other path is that, and this I think is the least likely, but Fernando is not going anywhere in Aston Martin. Mm-hmm. We're getting to the point now where Aston Martin is not able to make the impact that they're able to do in the Constructors' Championship because of Lance Stroll. Mm-hmm. And I think if Lawrence is really convicted about fighting for the championship, then he has to get to a point where he's got to get to a point where he has to remove the familial ties with Lance and be like, at this point, you're not cutting it. We're getting somebody else. So the reason why I pick out Aston Martin specifically is because Red Bull is not going to change their driver lineup, and I don't think that Yuki Tsunoda is the answer to Max Verstappen.
No.
I don't think it is. Mm-mm. I am not 100% convinced that Liam Lawson is. Mm-hmm. He just hasn't had enough time in Formula One to prove me otherwise. But Sergio Perez is the best thing that Red Bull has right now. Mm-hmm. They're going to stick with him.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And at this point, I think you could have made a case for Daniel Ricciardo, but at this point with his injury,
there's so much up in the air. We saw two performances of him, and they didn't necessarily go great. They didn't go terribly, but they didn't go great. And then he broke his wrist.
Yeah, and now is being beaten by Liam Lawson.
Yeah.
So I don't think that Daniel Ricciardo is the answer. I don't think that Red Bull have the answer. Ferrari have their answers. Mercedes not going anywhere. McLaren is not making any changes anytime soon. The only other team that is likely to make changes is Aston Martin. The other piece of that, remember, is Aston Martin are teaming up with Honda in 2026 with the new power unit regulations.
Yeah.
And Yuki Tsunoda is a Honda driver before he's a Red Bull driver.
Yep.
He was a Red Bull driver because Honda supplied power units to Red Bull. And if Honda jumps ship and goes to Aston Martin, I think they're going to get Yuki Tsunoda over to Aston Martin. And with a partnership like Honda, I just think that Lawrence Stroll is going to be outweighed in his decision to keep Lance.
Yeah.
When you compare Yuki Tsunoda and Lance Stroll, I'm taking Yuki Tsunoda every day of the week.
Oh, yeah. So, well, that's 2026. So, what do you think is the likelihood of this scenario happening? They sack Yuki Tsunoda and have Daniel Ricciardo and Liam Lawson as the two AlphaTauri drivers.
I think the only way that Yuki Tsunoda goes for something like that is if he can go ahead and get bedded in at Aston Martin as a reserve and test driver.
That would make sense.
And, either that or they go ahead and dump Lance. Mm-hmm. I other than those two things happening, I don't think Yuki Tsunoda goes anywhere else. And so I think I legitimately think unless Yuki Tsunoda goes anywhere, it's Liam Lawson or Daniel Ricciardo in the other AlphaTauri seat.
That makes sense.
If Yuki Tsunoda does leave, I think the logical choice is Liam Lawson and Daniel Ricciardo. Yeah. I think that is just the logical choice. It makes sense. But I think that is like the last really big key in what has been a really quiet, silly season.
Yeah.
Because Alex Albon is signed on for another year at Williams. I think he's going to be a really big key part in the 2025 driver market shuffle. Logan Sargent, Williams hasn't made up their mind, and I don't think that they're going to until after the season. Alfa Romeo just signed up Zhou Guanyu for another year alongside Valtteri Bottas. That lineup's not changing.
Yeah.
Aston Martin, there's some questions. All of the other teams pretty much have their drivers lined up. Haas have their drivers confirmed now. Ferrari are still waiting to do their deals, but they're at least signed on through 2024.
Yeah.
Red Bull are signed on for 2024. McLaren are signed on for a little bit longer. I don't think Oscar Piastri is signed on for next year, but at this point, that deal is a no-brainer. I would not be surprised if Oscar Piastri gets extended.
I wouldn't be either. He should be.
If I'm Zach Brown, I'm not changing a dang thing at that team. I'm not changing a single thing at that team because it's working. And Oscar Piastri has what it takes to go toe-to-toe with Lando Norris. And so I really do think that AlphaTauri and Williams are going to be the last little key in what I think is going to be a pretty understated silly season.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. The base, especially in Singapore, but I know I mentioned earlier about Ferrari's recent success after the summer break. Do you think this will bode well for them going into next year? Do you think this is a good trampoline to jump off of going into next year?
I think yes, for a couple reasons. One, this recent upturn in success, I think, has less to do with upgrades and more to do with the fact that they're just at tracks that suit their car a little bit more.
Okay.
Monza was always, they always put an aero package together to be competitive at Monza because it's their home race. You can always count on them doing really well. Belgium was what it was. Zandvoort, they knew that they were going to be uncompetitive there. And I don't think that they expected to be this competitive at Singapore, but I think that there was a little bit higher expectation that they were going to be somewhat competitive.
Yeah.
So I think it's just more, and I think it's going to be a little bit more back to usual at Japan. I think they're going to be a little bit back to usual going into, I think, Las Vegas, very similar to Miami. I think they're going to struggle there.
Yeah, it's a very high speed circuit.
Brazil, I think they're going to. So I don't think that they're going to be in a place really to make an impact. I think the reason why I do think that it is successful is because I do think that they have figured out the problems of this car. And I think that's why you're seeing such high levels of success in the second half of the season. It's not that the car has changed. I think that they understand the car. And Charles even said that next year they've already put the 2024 car on a simulator, and it's already and what they have learned this year has directly affected what they're doing for 2024. So I think now, is it going to change the pecking order? Unlikely, because I think it's going to take an act of God to dethrone Red Bull from where they're at.
Yeah.
And I think the way that is shaping up is are Aston Martin going to learn from how poorly their car has developed this year, and are Mercedes actually going to wise up and get it right? Which I don't know. So I think it's going to depend on those two teams, and the other dark horse in that equation is McLaren too.
I was just about to say McLaren's
they're doing really well. But I think if there are two teams that are best poised to make a really good leap into 2024, it's McLaren, and you have to say Ferrari.
Yeah.
And I think next year will be the actual real test for Fred Vasseur at Ferrari.
Yes.
I think he was hired on so late in the process for the 2023 season that all of the problems that Ferrari had at the beginning of the season are from the previous regime. Yeah. Mattia Binotto and the outgoing
and I even still think that the struggles that they face right now are still from really all of this entire season. Whatever is happening is a result of what happened before Fred Vasseur.
Yes. So
next year will be.
So here's the thing. Before Mattia Binotto was team principal at Ferrari, he was head of vehicle concept. the entire time he's been head of vehicle, and then when he took over for team principal, he maintained his role as head of vehicle concept.
Yeah.
So the entire time he's been in charge of this vehicle concept, the Ferrari has had the same problem, which is they're really quick over one lap, and they cannot maintain their tires during the race. And I think the only reason why they were competitive in 2017 and 2018 is because, one, they had the illegal engine, and two,
it was a literal rocket ship.
And two, Mercedes were still struggling with 2017 and really started off struggling in 2017. And they were, they literally coined their 2017 Mercedes the Diva.
Yeah.
And they were still struggling with that through 2017 and 2018. And Ferrari didn't develop their car well enough to get rid of that. So they have had this baked in problem for a long, long time. This problem that they have with tire wear.
The cake that never ends.
It's the issue. It's the reason why it's one of the many reasons why they were uncompetitive in the second half of last year.
Yeah.
And it's I think the chief reason why they're uncompetitive this year.
Yeah.
So I think next year is really going to start to begin the test of Fred Vasseur. And if we see, maybe we don't see them win the championship. I think Red Bull is going to win the championship until these new engine regulations in 2026. But maybe they don't win the championship, but if they can compete with Red Bull week in and week out next season, I think that needs to be the target.
Yeah.
That and I think that will acquit Fred Vasseur very, very well. If they get overtaken by Mercedes and McLaren, I think then Ferrari can panic.
Yeah. That's
but I do think that they are set up for a lot of success for next year.
In Fred we trust.
Yes, truly. I mean, they've had really good, really solid development this year. After they fired their strategists, they've
been doing some pretty good strategy recently.
The second half of the season has been a real improvement for them strategically and operationally. We haven't seen the mistakes like we saw in the beginning part of the season. Yeah. The biggest example being Monaco in 22.
Stop! I still have PTSD from
that race. I think we're still not quite. I think that they have made a lot of improvements in that area, and so if they can if they can have really solid operations, for smooth operations for the remainder of the season, I think then I will be much more confident in their ability to compete for a championship.
I would agree.
Than I have in the past. 2019 was fine. 2020 was okay. 2020, it was really 2022 that they just had a bunch of problems. And so I think if they improve for the remainder of the season, I will regain a lot of confidence in their ability to run an operation.
Yeah, I agree. So, overall, the Singapore Grand Prix, what would you rate it out of 10?
It's tough. I think I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10.
I was going to say 6.
Because the first 45 laps, I would have given a 2 or a 3 out of 10. But the last 15 laps,
like 800,
10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Easy 10 out of 10.
Oh, yeah.
So I 6
is good.
I think 6 is good. I think
6 out of 10 sounds nice, but then you realize it's only a 60%. And you're like, yeah, that makes sense.
I will say, I think another reason why this race was so intriguing is something that I've thought the entire season, which is, you've had Red Bull dominating and you've had Red Bull winning, but the battle that we had for first place is the battle that we've been having for second place the entire season.
Yeah.
Like battle for best outside of Red Bull has been really awesome.
If you were to take Red Bull completely out of the season, this would be the most thrilling Formula One season we've ever seen.
Let me just
Like, it's from second to like sixth has been ridiculously close. And even the constructors too, second to like fourth has been really close in the constructors.
If you took Red Bull completely out of the equation, I'm just going to go through what the podium would be at every race this year. Bahrain would have been Fernando Alonso, Carlos Sainz, and Lewis Hamilton. Saudi Arabia would have been Fernando Alonso, George Russell, Lewis Hamilton. Australia would have been Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, and Lance Stroll. Azerbaijan would have been Charles Leclerc, Fernando Alonso, Carlos Sainz.
So far, Fernando Alonso's winning.
Miami would be Fernando Alonso, George Russell, and Carlos Sainz.
It's like 2012.
Emilia-Romagna didn't happen. Monaco would have been Fernando Alonso, Esteban Ocon, and Lewis Hamilton. Spanish Grand Prix would have been Lewis Hamilton, George Russell, and Carlos Sainz. Canada would have been Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, and Charles Leclerc. Austria would have been Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, and Fernando Alonso. The UK would have been Lando Norris, Lewis Hamilton, and Oscar Piastri. Hungary would have been Lando Norris, Lewis Hamilton, and Oscar Piastri once again. Belgium would have been Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso. Netherlands would have been Fernando Alonso, Pierre Gasly, and Carlos Sainz.
Fernando would be winning.
Italy would have been Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc, and George Russell. And Singapore was what it was. Carlos Sainz, Lando Norris, and Lewis Hamilton. That season, if you had told me that that would be that season, that's a very like almost 2012-esque type season.
Oh yeah.
You would have had, Fernando Alonso wins races, Lando Norris wins his first
couple
race.
races.
Ferrari won 2 in Italy. Lance Stroll on a podium at Lance Stroll on a podium in Australia. You would have had so many amazing
Lewis
storylines.
Hamilton in a fight.
Lewis Hamilton wins a race again for the first time since 2021.
Yeah.
I think. Did he win in 22? First time winning since 2021.
Once.
So but that has been the battle for second place the entire season. And I think the reason why Singapore was so good is because we didn't have Red Bull getting in the way of that. And we actually got to see what that could be like. And I think that's why so many people are raving about Singapore. Not necessarily because the race was good, but because we finally got to see that battle for P2 on display.
So currently, if Red Bull were out of it, Red Bull, Max is 1, Sergio's 2. It'd be Lewis Hamilton would have 180 points. If we were just take him out. So Lewis Hamilton, 10 points behind Lewis would have been Fernando. Only like 20-some points behind with Carlos Sainz, and only 20 points behind him, Charles Leclerc.
Yeah. So,
and only 16 points behind that would be George Russell.
The championship would still very much be completely wide open.
Oh yeah! Oh my gosh! Yes, we would. Yeah.
And I think that's why. And then you take a look at the constructor standings. Red Bull in first. Then you have Mercedes. Ferrari only behind by like 15 points. Aston Martin only behind another 50 points. McLaren, they're doing well, but I think they're just kind of out of it. But that battle between Mercedes, Ferrari, Aston Martin, if they can improve their form a little bit. But I think this battle between Mercedes and Ferrari for second place
is going to be thrilling.
It's going to be thrilling for the remainder of the season. So I think that's what I'm going to be looking at because I think Red Bull goes back to business as usual in Japan.
Oh, yeah.
I really do.
I would agree. Yeah. Well, I also thought it was a great race. I'm very, very happy with how it turned out. Who ended up getting driver of the day?
Carlos Sainz.
Carlos Sainz, driver of the day. He deserved it, but also my vote would have been Liam Lawson.
I think what tipped it was because he was finally the first non-Red Bull winner, but I think what really did it was how smart of a race he ran. When they put on that radio message that he was doing what he was doing on purpose, I think that was a no-brainer.
Oh yeah. So very good race. I'm very happy. I'm very, very excited. We've got Japan this upcoming weekend. I think I mean, I think Red Bull will run away with it, but I'll be intrigued to see how Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes. I'll be intrigued to see how they do.
Yeah.
Because essentially, I'm watching for second place at this point. We all know Max and Red Bull are going to win.
I wonder if there's any stat on how can Max Verstappen win the championship.
I don't know. I know in Singapore it was like if he won the race and Mercedes or Sergio Perez or Lewis Hamilton or like Mercedes finished out of the points.
Yeah.
He would have won.
So two-time defending champ can also see the title race sealed in Japan if he wins the race and Perez fails to complete one of the next 2 races. So it's still, I don't think the championship's going to be wrapped up in Japan. Championship's not going to be wrapped up in Japan. Likely.
What comes after Japan?
That's a great question.
Is it
Japan? After that, Qatar. So I think he's realistically going to be targeting the United States as an opportunity to win the championship.
Texas.
I think Austin, Texas, or Mexico would be the next 2. And I think the reason why he can't quite seal it up in Japan is because we still have the Qatar Grand Prix added to the schedule and we have the Las Vegas Grand Prix added to the schedule.
Yeah.
So we're not going to see a champion crowned next race, but I would be shocked if it wasn't business as usual next week.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. So that's all we have for this episode. It was a great Singapore Grand Prix. We're excited for Japan.
Japan's always a great race.
Oh, it's so good. So be sure to follow us on all of our social medias, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, all that stuff. And we'll catch you in Japan.